What's going on, everybody? Happy Super Bowl Sunday. I just wanted to hop on here, impromptu Super Bowl stream. Shit. Playback going, make sure this microphone works because the last stream was a fucking disaster and it really threw me off. So I made the effort to get my ass out and get a brand new microphone. And big shout out to King Gore for hipping me to this Quadcast microphone. I actually had it at Walmart for a pretty good price, so gonna try this out. Hopefully the sound is coming through okay. Hopefully everything sounds a lot better than the last stream. We're at the first half of it. Man, that fucking really irks me. Really pissed me off. Um, but hopefully this is coming in okay. Like I just kind of want to hop on here and test out this mic. We'll talk about a little bit of the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is tonight. Chiefs, Niners. Just kind of have a little hang sesh here. Didn't really have anything planned for this weekend because I really didn't know what my microphone situation was going to be. Um, but I picked this up yesterday. I'm not sure how I feel about the cheap titty bar colors on this thing. I know there's a way that you can turn this off. I mean, I hope it's not too distracting or too weird. It really does just feel like something out of a titty bar or something. But I know there's a way you can turn this off, but I think I have a Mac. I'm doing this on a MacBook, and I think that you can only there's like an app or something you can download for this, but um, it only works on like PCs. So I don't know if I'll be able to turn this off. I'm still learning, still trying to figure this thing out. But hopefully everything's coming in okay. Everything's clear. I like it's a pretty damn good, pretty nice microphone. I've been fiddling with it. Um, for the last couple of days. But wanted to hop on here, just kind of talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. We will talk a little bit about George as well. Did want to get in here and do a little bit about Romero this weekend. But like I said, didn't really have anything planned going into this. But I figure, what the hell? I got nothing else going on. Uh, you know, waiting for the Super Bowl. Even the Super Bowl, I'm not really that too fucking hyped about. And it's weird, like typical, like obviously Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers. I'm a Packers fan and a Titans fan. I grew up, an hour away from Nashville. So I grew up going to Titans games my whole life, but I grew up a Packers fan first because the Packers were in existence before the Titans were. Um, and I remember being a kid and seeing Brett Favre win the Super Bowl with the Packers in '96, and that kind of hooked me. I was just like, holy shit, this Favre guy is awesome. He just throws it downfield, and he's a gunslinger. He doesn't give a shit. And that was kind of the first team that won the Super Bowl in my youth. Like growing up when I was a kid, before the Packers came along, um, it was always the Cowboys. And I was brought up to hate the Cowboys. And I think that's the case anywhere in the country if you're a football fan. If you didn't grow up in Dallas or you didn't grow up being a Cowboys fan, you hate the Cowboys. No matter what team you like, no matter what the situation is. Um, Nobody liked the Cowboys. So growing up as a kid, it was always the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl every year. It seemed like there was that one year where San Francisco won it, but all the Super Bowls I remember as a kid watching, the Cowboys and the Bills, Cowboys and the Steelers, and the Packers were the kind of the first team that came along after that run there in the early '90s with the Cowboys, where the Packers kind of came along and won Super Bowl, went to back to back Super Bowls, lost the second one. So that was kind of that perfect storm there of so that's how I grew up a Packers fan. But really going into this, like I really don't have a rooting interest in this one. Usually in the Super Bowl, like if it's two teams I really have no connection to, I kind of go with the best story, kind of like when Jerome Bettis was going to win his his only Super Bowl in his last game of his career, or Ray Lewis retiring, kind of when I was kind of cheering for the Ravens, kind of like sending Ray Lewis out on, I'm not even a big Ravens fan or a Ray Lewis fan, to be honest with you, but I like the story, I like a good story in Super Bowl. I don't feel like the Super Bowl really has a compelling story. I mean, god damn, all we hear about is Travis Kelsey and Taylor Swift and all this other shit. I don't care. I don't feel like most people do. If you're a football fan, like, who gives a shit? There's they're just going to show Taylor Swift, cheering every time he catches the ball, and it's just it feels like that's what this Super Bowl is built around. It's just like Taylor Swift, and I get it. She has a lot of fans. She's very popular, but I don't give a shit, to be honest with you. We got in the chat here. Grande, what's up, man? Everybody took CMC at 240, 100 to win, 340 to score 2 or more touchdowns a day. Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of those bets, a lot of those, especially a lot of like the weird prop bets, like heads or tails. I'm like, I'll put $5 on that. So I've already asked permission for my fiance. I'm like, yeah, is it cool if we put a little bit of money on this thing? Um, but yeah, in terms of who's winning, I know that. What is that? I think San Francisco's 2-point favorites in this game. I believe that's what I saw, which is kind of interesting. I mean, anytime the Chiefs are in, and you feel like they would be favored to win, but yeah. Like I said, I really don't know what's going to happen in the Super Bowl. I mean, if Chiefs win, it's their third, so they're kind of the new dynasty. So that is kind of an interesting concept. But at the same time, like, I really don't want to see. Like, my fiance even said that she saw that there was some kind of prop bet where you can bet on whether or not Travis Kelce, if they win the Super Bowl, whether or not Travis Kelce proposes to Taylor Swift after the game. And it's just like, God, who cares? Why would anybody care? I mean, I guess, you know, ladies care. I don't know. I don't get Taylor Swift. I don't understand. Like, I will say this, though. I'm not the biggest like modern pop fan. Like, I really don't. I'm an old man. Like, I'm really out of it on a lot of like the current stuff. But at work, I've been using a different work van that I'm used to. My van's been in the shop, so I've been using my buddy's van for work, and he listens kind of like the top 40 modern pop music. And I will say that because my fiance listens to Taylor Swift all the time, so I've heard a little bit of Taylor Swift. But like, if you ask me to name like 3 songs of Taylor Swift, I couldn't do it. The only one that I know that I kind of like is because it's so goddamn bad and goofy is where she's like, "Look what you made me do, look what you made me do." Old Taylor's dead. Shit, shit. It's such a bad song, but it's like, I don't know. Um, but I will say that Taylor Swift's music is far superior than a lot of the shit that's on the radio now. I will say that, but I don't fucking know. Okay, cool. Everything's clear sound. All right, awesome. Yeah, because last week it was just like doing this like fucking weird echo thing, and it was like for like half the show, and I had no idea until King Gore got on and was like, "Dude, you got an echo." I was like, "Oh shit!" And I listened to it. I was like, "Oh, this is terrible." My mind, like, I was in the middle of watching the booby hatch of all things, but I was just like, God Almighty. Yeah, it really threw me off last week, and I was just it kind of bummed me out. I was just like, shit, I have to get a new mic. But I'm kind of digging this one so far, so we'll see. I'll listen back to it, and make sure everything's coming in okay. Synthetic, what's up, man? Hey there. This is so much better than the Super Bowl. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I know a lot of people watch the Super Bowl for the commercials and the halftime show. Which the halftime show this year, even, it's like, Usher, really? Like, are we at that point? Like, I remember there was a period there, and I guess it's just taste wise or whatever. And I know this was what they did after you know um, uh, the Janet Jackson incident where her titty popped out. Where they started just like, instead of booking, Janet Jackson or Britney Spears or whoever, they started booking like the old time classic rockers. And I love that. Like, to me, like, I'm a huge Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers fan. I love their halftime performance. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, they did a halftime performance that I thought was really good. I like that period of the Super Bowl halftime performances. But they've kind of gotten back to, although the one that a couple of years ago, I guess it was, when they had like Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and those guys. That was pretty entertaining. Um, the Weekend halftime performance. I wasn't a fan of the Weekend at the time, but over the last couple of years, I've kind of appreciated more his music. Um, but yeah, Usher though, like, I feel like Usher is just one of those guys that, to me at least, I don't know, maybe he's had some hits here in the past decade, but in as far as I know, like, Usher is the guy that I listened to in fucking elementary school or something. You know what I mean? Um, Thanks for stopping by my Friday night set. Oh, absolutely, man. That was a lot of fun. I was actually, it's interesting. When you were, the sounds of like the stuff that you were playing was just like, there were just moments of just like, man, this is fucking relaxing. The John Carpenter fan in me was just kind of getting giddy listening to that stuff. But listen to you guys talk about this stuff. Like, I'm a complete novice. I have no idea 90% of the stuff you guys are talking about. But I love listening to people who are knowledgeable and passionate about what their area of expertise is, and I love listening to that stuff. So yeah, I was in there listening and kind of taking in, kind of figuring out what you guys are talking about here and there. But that was, yeah, I enjoyed that a lot, man. Let's see. Grande says Purdy being drafted last and winning it all would be a nice story. Yeah, I guess that is a good story for the Super Bowl. Mr. Irrelevant, being the last guy drafted a couple of years ago. Now, you know, uh, going on winning it all with the 49ers. And how many Super Bowls do the Niners have? So this would be number 4 or 5 for San Francisco. And you guys just know that off the top of my head. Synth, you're from San Francisco, aren't you, man? See, Niners, I've never won in my lifetime. I'd be all for winning. Yeah, that's the funny thing. My uncle, he's passed now. It would, I think about that all the time when the Niners are in the Super Bowl. I think about my uncle. His name was Fidel, and he was married into the family. He married my aunt. My aunt was living in California at the time, in Sacramento area, and my uncle was a huge San Francisco 49ers fan. So it was funny when he moved, and he used to be, he was like he's kind of mixed up in like a lot of the Mexican gangs and stuff when he was younger and stuff. So he moved to Kentucky, like Western Kentucky, like, redneck central, he moved to Kentucky when I was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And he was a huge San Francisco 49ers fan. He always used to give me shit. He was always like, "Oh yeah, 49ers, every Super Bowl they've been to, they've never lost." And I'm like, "Yeah." So the one where Kaepernick, they lost that one. The most recent one against the Chiefs, they lost. So anytime the Niners are in the Super Bowl, I think of my uncle. But it's funny. My uncle was a really, really cool guy. He was the one that first introduced me to the Warriors when him and my aunt first um, moved to Kentucky. I mean, he was still like, he still had like the lowrider truck. I mean, he was all the way. But I remember staying the night at their house when they first moved, and he was like, hey, he used to call me Mijo. Hey, Mijo, have you ever seen a movie, The Warriors? I'm like, I've never heard of it. I'm like 8, 9 years old, like I said. Like, no, I've never heard of the Warriors. He was like, oh man, it's awesome. It's about these gangs and they try to kill this one gang. Blah, blah. I'm just like, okay. And we sit down and watch the Warriors. 8, 9 years old. This dude's like, oh, you got to watch the Warriors. It's my all-time favorite movie. So he's the one that first introduced me to the Warriors. I love the Warriors now. But anyway, that's just what I think of when I think of the 49ers. I think of my uncle. Disrupt Media, what's up, man? Good to have you in here. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good weekend. I know it's an early stream for me. Usually I go, a little bit later on, but like I said, Super Bowl's tonight. I really wasn't planning on doing much this weekend because I really didn't know what my microphone situation was going to be. But luckily, as I picked one up and I kind of wanted to test it out, and fiance and the kid are out of the house, so I kind of got some peace and quiet here, calm before the storm, if you will. Since says Swift has talent, but I can't stand her output. All formulaic and cheesy, but it sells. Yeah, I mean that's kind of, she does write her own music, though. I will say that, and I know Toby Keith just passed away, which I wasn't a huge Toby Keith fan either. I've never been a big fan of his, but I do know that he is the one that kind of discovered her and signed her to her first record deal. And that was kind of the selling point at the time. Like I remember that. I mean, this was early 2000s, I think. And that was kind of the selling point, is that she, played guitar, wrote her own music and stuff like that. So I respect her in that aspect. But yeah, I mean, it's not my cup of tea. It's not my thing at all. I mean, like you said, it's very formulaic and cheesy to me. My fiance eats that shit up though. She's all about, she's a Swifty or whatever you want to call it. Um, but I will say, compared to a lot of the other stuff on the radio now, I mean, I can see there's a level to it. It is better than, like, what was it? There was a song the other day I was listening to, and it was just like, it was just all about this girl. I don't even remember who it was, but it was just all about this woman talking about how much she wanted to beat the shit out of her ex-boyfriend and Kia's car and all this other shit. I'm just like, really? This is the shit that we're selling teen girls now? Like, this is the idea that, oh, we should beat the shit out of our ex-boyfriends and destroy their shit. And it's like, imagine if roles were reversed on that and it was a guy singer singing a song about how much he wanted to beat the shit out of his ex-girlfriend. I don't think that would fly, but just so much bad shit on the radio now that Taylor Swift, you can see why she's kind of a step ahead of everyone else. Your audio is a little shoeboxy, but you're a clear shoeboxy. Okay. Well, yeah, like I said, I'm still playing with it. I kind of got it on a setting right now. I'll try a few other things. So the next few streams, it's still a process here, but um, we'll see how it goes. You say I saw Tom Petty live at Berkeley Greek Theater several years before he died. Great show. Yeah, like I said, I was a huge Tom Petty fan. Um, Probably my all-time favorite artist. I mean, there was a period there of about 5 or 6 years where that's really one of the only things I listen to. Tom Petty radio on Sirius XM. Anytime we go on vacation or take a trip and we rent a car, usually there's Sirius in the car, and that's 99% of the time, that's all it'll stay on, um, is Tom Petty radio. But yeah, I got to see Tom Petty twice before he passed away. The first time in Nashville at the Bridgestone Arena. That concert was fun. It was the first time we saw Tom Petty, and me and my best friend from back home in Western Kentucky. We were just the biggest Tom Petty fans in the world, and my ex girlfriend at the time. I mean, we were just in this cycle where that's all we wanted to listen to was Tom Petty. So when we saw that it was right around when the album Mojo came out. He was touring to promote that album, and he was coming to Bridgestone, and we paid and got floor seats, and like we were just so ready for Tom Petty. That was a fun night, but I did see him again here in Evansville at the Ford Center, and this was just kind of like a random show. They didn't have an album out; they weren't really, promoting anything. I think this was around 2014, I want to say. And I liked that show better because, like at the Bridgestone, they kind of just played the hits. They played, I mean, and God knows if Tom Petty played the hits, that's a 4-hour show in and of itself. Um, but the show they played here in Evansville at the Ford Center, they were pulling out deep cuts. Like they were playing Traveling Wilbury stuff. I mean they were playing like B sides they were like, oh yeah, we haven't played this in you know over 15 years, but we're gonna try it out tonight because what the hell. So that was a fun concert. Um, But yeah, that was just a great live band. One of those bands that'll start on a song and just take it somewhere completely different. Like one perfect example is "Don't Come Around Here No More." Um, I've never been a huge fan of that song until I saw them play it live, and then I was just like, "Holy shit, this was like a transcendental experience." Which I may have been under the influence of a little bit of a little bit of the herbal essence, if you know what I mean. But it was perfect for that, I will say. So it says, yeah, I'm south of San Francisco, but I don't follow sports at all. I played football in junior high and water polo in high school. Water polo, that's an interesting sport to play in high school. We don't have that here in Kentucky. We don't play water polo uh, in high school, along with plenty of random street basketball, but don't watch any sports. Yeah, football is really the only major sport that I follow. I'm not really a big fan of NBA. I mean, growing up in Kentucky, I became kind of inundated around, Kentucky basketball. So I do follow that a little bit, and Kentucky football, college football. Um, but I'm not really a big college football fan. Mostly, I follow the NFL. Um, Hockey, I got kinda into hockey for a little bit there when the Preds were kinda hot, the Predators down in Nashville, for a couple of years there, and going to hockey games is a lot of fun, but I'm not a big baseball fan, football's kind of the main sport for me that I kinda follow and kinda keep up with. um I wouldn't even say kind. I'm a huge football fan. Like that's huge. Uh, Pro wrestling's another thing. Like I keep track. I don't watch it quite as much or I get into it quite as much, but I listen to a lot of wrestling podcasts like Cornette and Bischoff and which the Bischoff podcast, 83 Weeks. If any of you guys are wrestling fans out there, is a pretty damn good podcast. I've been watching it a little more here lately, and he makes a lot of good points. Um, but yeah. Mm, Yeah, water polo and high that's interesting, though, that's interesting. We didn't have a water polo team at my high school. Um, but yeah, like I said, I think the Niners are what, 2-point favorites tonight? I if I had to pick, I guess I would pick Kansas City. I mean, they just kinda turn it on in the playoffs, and because they didn't look good all year long. Um, I mean, they look really bad at times. But when the playoffs roll around, it's just like they turn it on. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes just kind of, they pull it out of their ass one way or the other. And San Francisco's kind of been lucky. Like, we should have beat San Francisco. The Packers should have beat San Francisco in the divisional game. We should have won that fucking game, but we were just young, and we shot ourselves in the foot too many times in that game. So we should have beat them there. And then the NFC Championship game, the Lions should have beat San Francisco. I mean, the Lions were up by 17 points at halftime or something like that. I mean, they should have won that game. So I feel like San Francisco, in a way, is kind of limping into this thing. But at the same time, like, when you win games like that, when you have comeback victories and big comebacks like that, sometimes that's enough to kind of propel your team to go all the way. So I don't know. It could be. I don't know. It could go either way, in my opinion. I'm trying to think who I would pick in this photo. Maybe I'll try to come up with a pick a little bit later on. Yeah, Last Dance for Mary Jane. No, it wasn't the Last Dance with Mary Jane, I'll tell you that. That was definitely we were definitely dancing that night, though. Titanic Discussions, what's up, man? It's been a while since I've seen you in here. It's good to see you, man. Greetings, Alpha, and everyone. Wanted to say thank you for all the David Emge tributes and videos. Unfortunately, I missed the last few live streams you did. No problem, man. Glad to be here for this one. Enjoy the game. Yeah, you too, man. Yeah, it's like I said, just wanted to hop on here. I don't know how long I'll go. Just want to hop on before the game and just kind of shoot the shit a little bit, test out this mic. Like I said, still gonna work with a little bit, do a few more tests, kind of make a few adjustments, and try to get it sounding the way I wanted to. But as long as I'm coming in loud and clear and I'm not echoing and it doesn't sound like complete dog shit like I did last week, I'm perfectly happy. There's a part of me that really wanted to take that down, because I know a lot of people listen to those streams back after the fact, and I'm not a perfectionist, I wouldn't say. Like, I'm not like, oh, everything has to be perfect, but I am one that's like, if there's an issue and it just makes me look incompetent and like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, it definitely chaps my ass. And listening back to it, I was just like, God damn. And I was almost even worse just listening to that the audio from the computer itself, just the computer mic. But hopefully, like I said, hopefully this is coming in okay. I apologize if the color and the changing lights are a little distracting. Like I said, it does kind of look like a titty bar in my room right now with this microphone, and I got the blue backlight on my TV back there. So, yeah, but we'll work around it and figure it out. Still getting used to it. Synthetic says, "Yeah, water polo got me in the best shape of my life." I'm sure it would, man. I mean, Jesus Christ, like, doing anything in a pool is damn good exercise. Incredible amount of calorie burn and cardio muscle build. Yeah, I mean, doing anything underwater will definitely get you going. Zombie Grease, what's up, man? Good to see you. We were chatting about posted a video on Jaws, one of the most terrifying movie moments in history. It was like a Shudder thing. I remember watching that on Shudder. He posted that on his channel. We were talking about Spielberg and Jaws and Duel and he made perfectly good point that Zombie Grease made in that conversation, was talking about the effects in Jaws and how the shark effect would not work with you know eh, just pretty much talking about, and I really hadn't thought about it until he kind of brought it up, but just kind of pointing out that effects, especially like practical effects in movies, like, are so, they hinge so much on the editing of the film as well. Um, a bad editor, like a badly edited movie, can make what could have been a good looking effect look like complete shit, just because they hung on to the shot a few frames too long. Perfect example of that. Like, I was thinking about after we were chatting about that. Perfect example to me is the end of Martin, when Cuda's driving the stake into the chest of Martin and the blood's coming up. And Savini has said this as well. He thinks that the effect didn't come off as well, just because he felt like it should have been edited a little tighter and cut it a little shorter. Because you see Cuda driving that stake down into Martin's chest, and he just keeps driving. He just hammers it all the way down. If Romero would have cut away, and I guess just the way he just kind of held on. And if Romero could have cut away like maybe a couple seconds beforehand, it would have. I think it would have worked a lot better than it did. But yeah, I mean, they're just perfect example of that. But uh, says, hey, going for San Francisco just because I was a Montana fan as a kid. Um, I don't. I think I was a little too young for like I'm totally aware of Montana. I was. I guess when I was a kid, it was Steve Young. Steve Young was kind of the guy that was big in San Francisco. But Montana, Montana was, Brady before Brady. Still, to me, I feel like Montana. I don't know who. You're a Montana fan. Would you can still consider Montana the greatest? Because growing up, like as a kid, like we were always taught, Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback to ever play the game. Um, but now everybody likes to go, likes to say Tom Brady is the GOAT, greatest of all time. It's hard to argue against that. Probably the greatest quarterback that I've seen in my lifetime that I grew up watching a lot just because of the area that I grew up in, and like to me just completely changed the game and the way the game is played. The way that the quarterback position is played completely changed was Peyton Manning. Like to me, Peyton Manning is the and I'm not a Peyton Manning fan, not a Colts fan. I grew up hating the Colts because, growing up right down the road from Nashville, being watching the Titans, the Colts always kicked the Titans' ass. Peyton Manning always kicked the Titans' ass. So I grew up hating Peyton Manning, and my cousin was a huge Colts fan. Just used to talk mad shit all the time. Just Peyton Manning's this, Peyton Manning's that, and I'm like, oh fuck Peyton Manning. He ain't shit. But looking back on it, he really did change the way that the quarterback position was played. I mean, Brady, the way that Brady played is completely built off of what Manning was able to do, and kind of the calling of the audibles at the line and all the communication and all the signals and stuff like that. Peyton Manning kind of invented that. His chemistry with Marvin Harrison and the way that they just kind of so to me, in my lifetime, Peyton Manning was the best quarterback. But growing up, like generally speaking, I think everybody was always, Joe Montana was the guy. Um, but I think I'm probably pulling for San Francisco tonight too. I asked my daughter the other day, who are we pulling for in the Super Bowl? Chiefs or the 49ers? And she was just like, Niners. And she has no idea what the fuck's going on. But I was like, all right, we're going for the Niners then. So I'll be pulling for the Niners too. Um, Disrupt Media says Muay Thai got me in the best shape of my life. Yeah, that'll do it too, I will say. Not that I know. I've never done fucking Muay Thai. But I assume that you have to be in pretty damn good shape to do that as well. Zombie Grease love the end of Martin. Yeah, I mean, I the way the story ends in Martin at the end. I like the driving the stake through the heart, which in the original black and white 2.5 hour cut, that's not the end of Martin. It actually goes on for another scene where detectives show up and are interrogating Kuda about the disappearance of this kid and all this other stuff. Um, oh, hang on, I'm getting a call. Anyway, I'll call him back here in a second. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the ending in Martin's completely different, and one of the detectives is played by Mike Gornick, and it kind of goes on. But I do think I like the idea of that it just ends with Martin getting killed, Kuda burying him in the backyard, and that's kind of I have a friend who I think is the Count, that type of thing. So yeah, I do love, but I do think that effect just like I said, the editing could have tightened that up a little bit, like maybe the last couple of shots of the stake into the heart, maybe cut away to something and then cut back to I don't know, but I love Martin. Yeah, everything about Martin. Just for me, says, oh, I met Joe Montana. That's interesting. How'd you meet Joe Montana? Was he like doing a signing or anything? Joe Montana's one of those guys that he doesn't really do a lot of media and stuff anymore. Him, Marino is another guy that growing up that everybody talked about how great he was. Which I think Marino got into some trouble a few years back. But So maybe that's why he's kind of kept a low profile. The Marino's from a Pittsburgh guy. I went to first time we were in Pittsburgh, we went to eat at this pizza restaurant. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it was like a brick oven pizza restaurant. And it was the weirdest restaurant. So we go in and there's like pictures of the owner of the restaurant and Dan Marino everywhere. Um, but in the bathroom, this was the weird part to me. The food was okay. I mean, I don't remember much about it. The food was okay. I'm trying to think what the name of that restaurant was. But it was so there was just something so odd about it because you go into the bathroom and in the men's restroom, like while you're sitting there taking a shit or whatever you're doing, there's just like pictures of like Pamela Anderson in a bikini or Sophia Loren in a, whatever. And it's just like, I don't like, I'm in a restaurant. Like if I'm sitting here taking a shit, I don't really want to see Pamela Anderson in a bikini looking back at me. There's just something weird about that. I don't know, but that's what I remember about that restaurant. But that and there were pictures of Marino everywhere. Sid says I met Bill Walsh once at an Ingram Micro event in San Francisco. Had nothing to do with football. That's interesting. Bill Walsh, I mean, you know, definitely one of the greatest head coaches of all time for sure. True legend in the NFL. Synthetic says the Martin House chase scene is a lot of fun. Yeah, that's one of my, and talking about editing, I think that's some of George's best editing work is that scene where Martin's chasing the couple throughout the house, and that house is still standing and looks pretty much exactly the same as it did in the movie. I haven't been inside the house. I've been to the actual house. On the outside, it looks pretty much exactly the same. And the people that live there now, I don't think that they are. From what I hear, I don't think that they're really fans of the film or anything like that, and they're just kind of like, So I don't really know of anybody that's actually been inside the house to see how much of it, looks the way it did in '76 or whenever they were shooting Martin. But the outside of the house, though, it's a pretty cool location if you're ever in Pittsburgh to check out. Can't remember the address right off the top of my head, but the outside of that, I mean, it still looks exactly the same. I love that architecture of that house too, and that whole neighborhood has some really interesting, architecture. I will say that. Disrupt Media. He came into a restaurant I worked at. 40-year-old men were acting like little kids. Um, I imagine they were. That's pretty damn cool. Did he tip? Did he tip well? That's the big question. As somebody who's worked in the service industry a lot of their life, I base a lot of my judgments on people by how they tip. But anyway, let me text my fiance back. She okay, never mind. Just want to make sure nothing was wrong. She took my daughter. They went out to they can go play at the park and and then after that she's taking her to the Y for swim lessons. So which I went last week and that was fun. Let me text her back real quick and let her know that I'm not dead or anything. Okay. You don't remember if he tipped well? That's the thing, like, when you're famous and, like, everybody knows who you are anytime you go to a restaurant, like, to me, like, that would be so much pressure. It's like, how much do I tip? Do I over tip? Like, I'm sure a lot of famous people do over tip just so they don't get that bad rep, especially in this day and age of social media and stuff when you can just, jump right on, Facebook or whatever and talk about, "Oh, fucking, Dave Chappelle came into the restaurant tonight and stiffed me. Fuck him." And then, of course, that'll get shared a billion times, and then before you know it. Since I like how you're like look a mini Star Trek warm core. Yeah, I mean, I don't like I said, I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, it is kind of cool, I guess. It's something a little visual for streaming purposes. I mean, this mic is pretty much built specifically um, for streaming purposes. But like I said, I don't know. When I plugged it in, I was just like, God, now I look like the DJ at a cheap titty bar or something somewhere. But But yeah, there is something kind of relaxing about it. Probably look a little better if I, lowered the lights a little bit in here and got a little trippy with it. Good thing I'm not on the Mary Jane right now. I might just be sitting here staring at it, just watching the colors go. And I know there's like I said, there's an app or something you can download and you can change the colors or settings or whatever. But like I said, I haven't dug that deep into it yet. I'm just kind of worried about making sure I'm coming in clear and you guys can hear me. I'm not just sitting here talking for 30 minutes and the whole time everybody's listening, just like, what the fuck is going on with this guy? Everything's repeating. He's just like, hey, hey, hope everybody, buddy is good, doing, oh, go, okay. My apology. If you guys if any of you guys are sitting through that first 30, 40 minutes of that stream last week, you guys are fucking cool as shit, and I appreciate it. Because I wouldn't have. I'd have been like, this fucking guy, I ain't listening to this shit. Um, like I said, did want to talk a little bit about Romero here. I got some streams coming up the next couple of weeks. Some pretty cool ideas that we'll be doing. Like I said, just wanted to hop on here and I always say tonight, but hop on here this afternoon before the Super Bowl comes on and just kind of chit chat and hang out a little bit, test out this mic. But did want to talk about Romero a little bit. I put up a poll on the YouTube page this week, and this is always interesting, and it got a lot of votes. But really, the people have spoken. I posted the question: which of these unmade Romero films would you most like to have seen? And the options were the original Day of the Dead script, which is of course the script that Romero wrote originally for Day of the Dead, which was going to have like a $6 or $7 million budget. But the whole story with that is the Salah Hassanin, who Romero had the 3 picture deal with, um, that spawned out of them signing a deal to distribute Dawn of the Dead. Um, he refused to give Romero the $6 or $7 million to make the Day of the Dead, his original Day of the Dead script, um, because he wanted, if I basically what Salah said was, I will give you the $7 million to do this Day of the Dead script, but you have to promise me an R rating. And Romero said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to compromise or cut back on the gore or anything like that. I want it to come out unrated. And Saul said, well, you can do an unrated version, but you're only getting $3 million for it. So Romero just kind of had to shrink the script. So I don't know. We'll talk about it here in a second. But so yeah, the options were that. The Stand, which Romero was attached to in the early 80s, and I think even attached to for a bit there in the 90s before it actually ended up getting made with Mick Garris. Resident Evil, of course, there's a whole documentary about George's involvement with the original Resident Evil that's coming out soon. Pet Cemetery, which went on to be a pretty big hit for Mary Lambert, which George was originally set 100% to direct, but unfortunately he had to go back and do reshoots for Monkey Shines, which kind of precluded him from being able to do Pet Cemetery. And then, of course, The Mummy, which was a script that he had worked on quite a bit in the 90s that he was originally supposed to direct, which got passed off and became, the Brendan Fraser Mummy. Like, I forget who said it in the comments here. Let me read some of the comments from you guys that participated in this poll. Let me pull it up here. So Grande says that OG Day script, I think, would have been really cool to see had they gave him the $6 million he asked for. Still love the version we got, but in another world, that give me that OG Day of the Dead script. Yeah, and Grande, I mean, it kind of, the people have spoken when it came to this. I mean, it was kind of a landslide, but coming in first place and with over 160 votes on this thing, so a lot of people participating in this one. The original Day of the Dead script pulled away far and away with 56% of the vote. Second place with 25% of the vote was Resident Evil. Third place with 9% of the vote was Pet Cemetery. Fourth place was The Stand with 7%, and The Mummy came in at in fifth place with 2%. The Mummy's one that I think a lot of people, I kind of expected that one probably wasn't going to be the most popular. I'm kind of surprised that I even got 2% of the vote, to be honest with you. But I do think it would have been interesting to see what Romero would have done with The Mummy, because what The Mummy became, and it kind of became like this bigger thing. It really wasn't a horror film when the Brendan Fraser mummies that came after that, Scorpion King and all that. It's kind of a completely different thing. But I would have loved to have seen what Romero would have done with that concept because, of course, the mummy. I mean, I think from what I hear, Romero was kind of going more for a strict, like modern adaptation of the original Mummy from whatever year the original Mummy came out, and make it more of a horror film. So I would have really liked to have seen that. Um, but like I said, I think it's out of these for me personally. I would, like I said, I obviously would have loved to have seen that original day script. And there's a lot to get into about that. A lot of possibilities and a lot to discuss if that original day script had been made. But for me, like my vote would have gone for I would have probably gone to Resident Evil. Um, for me, that is the film that the screenplay. I've read the screenplay that George did for Resident Evil, um, and in my opinion, that's the one that out of all those that I wish George would have gotten the opportunity to make. That's the one that I think that I would have liked to have seen the most because I was a huge fan of the video games when they came out in the mid '90s. That's what kind of got me into all this to begin with. It kind of introduced me to the whole idea of what a zombie is and all that. And of course, I mean, it's just the perfect fit. And of course, George directed the the commercial for Resident Evil 2 over in Japan, which is called Biohazard 2. Really cool commercial. And the screenplay that George wrote, I've read a couple of times. It's to me, I mean, just screenplay alone. I mean, I don't know how sometimes things get lost in translation from screenplay stage to the filming stage. But for me, that screenplay is 10 times better than the film that we actually got because as a matter of fact, the movie that we ended up getting that Paul W.S. Anderson ended up directing, the screenplay that they used for that was not even originally written for Resident Evil. Like it was basically a completely separate screenplay that somebody had written, and they were just like, "All right, we have this property, this screenplay. Let's throw a little bit of some hints of Resident Evil here and there in it, and then voila, there we go." Whereas George's screenplay was written, you know, directly from directly from the video games. I mean, he literally had his assistant, Jason, who was JB Destiny and in Iron City Ass Kickers, had him play the video games and kind of translate. Because George was not a video game guy, but I mean, George is a horror guy, zombie guy. I mean, this was his thing. So George's screenplay is far more true to the video games, and I would have much rather seen that than what we ended up getting. Like the version of Resident Evil that we ended up getting that Paul W.S. Anderson gave us felt more like I don't know, like a sci-fi. It almost felt like if I say sci-fi in terms of like the genre, like it feels like a sci-fi film a lot of the times, but it almost in ways kind of feels like a sci-fi channel movie to me as well. Like it just like I remember when it came out and I watched it and I was just like I was a fan because I was a kid and I'd been waiting years for a Resident Evil film, so I was kind of just taking whatever I could get at the time. But yeah, going back and watching it now, it's just like, eek. And of course, George's version had a lot more gore. There were more creatures, like creatures from the video games. Um, like I said, more gore. It was more of a horror film. Far more of it took place in the big dark mansion. I mean, it was much more of a. It felt much more like the original game, and whereas the movie we ended up getting didn't. So out of those options, my pick, my opinion would be I would have loved to have seen George's version of Resident. Get to see that. Unfortunately, I even think at times there are certain shots or certain cues of music, even some of the costumes on the characters in Land of the Dead look far more like a Resident Evil film than the actual Resident Evil film that we got. Um, like the perfect example, the scene when Cholo in Land of the Dead is walking down the tracks, headed back into the city, headed for Fiddler's Green to go after Kaufman. There's that overhead shot where it's kind of going up, and you kind of see him walking. He's kind of walking. That looks like the end of a cutscene from Resident Evil to me. Even just the swell of the music there at that point. I don't know. I would have really loved to have seen George get a hold of that, and that would kind of be the thing that brought him back into the mainstream. But again, like I could say with a lot of these, the cause and effect. If George had made these, that's the real interesting discussion to have. Because let's say he does make Resident Evil, goes on, makes a ton of money. Do we get, what do we get after that? Does that give George the ability? I don't think we would have gotten Bruiser, which some people are like, okay, who gives a shit? But I love Bruiser. To me, I think that was kind of George return to form in the late '90s, early 2000s. Probably, I'm guessing we probably would have gotten a fourth Dead film. I'm But it's hard to say. I mean, if Resident Evil is a big success, do they just say, "Hey, we're going to make sequels to this"? Do you want to make? Does he make the sequels? Who knows? Um, but yeah, I mean, it would have definitely altered George's career going forward. That's obviously true. But that would be my choice. The original Day script, though, I mean, That's a big one. Big what if? What if that got made? And that was kind of something I was replying to Grande's comment on the poll with was, you know, if George did, just think about 1985 in itself. If you look at the other horror films and what if you look at film in general in 85, especially like right in the middle of the 80s. I mean, we're looking at Return of the Living Dead, Reanimator. The Friday the 13th series was hot. Um, I mean, 85. I mean, horror in the mid 80s at that point was just kind of it was a party. Even like Texas Chainsaw 2 came out a year later. That was a party. Not a lot of horror was being like, you know, hard hitting. It wasn't the 70s anymore. Horror wasn't in the 70s anymore. In the 70s, you had real horror films in the 70s, in my opinion. Like the 80s, there's so many great films in the 80s, great horror films that I love to this day. But it's a completely different type of horror film. I mean, the slashers, yeah, a lot of them are a little mean spirited, but at the end of the day, I mean, your Friday the 13th, your Freddy Krueger's, your Mike, but by the late 80s, they'd made Michael Myers into just another slasher guy. Um, so what if let's say they did give Romero that $7 million to make that original Day script in 1985 and release it unrated. That's a really big risk for a company, especially in the mid 80s when censorship was kind of on the rise. The early slashers, the success of those early slashers and the gore and the effects, um, I think that really caught a lot of people's attention, a lot of the wrong people's attention, like the critics and the parents against violent film or whatever, those types, those, and so studios were getting a little more tight, a little more stringent on, oh, it can't be this, can't be that, you can't do this, can't do that. So I totally understand why Salah Hassanin would refuse to put up that kind of money, because that is Creepshow's budget was 7 million, I believe, but Creepshow got an R rating. It was attached to Stephen King. There were, big time actors attached to it. So I understand the risk was not quite what it would have been if they had given that same budget to George to do Day of the Dead, which with that budget, you would think, would George reach out to some more name actors for that? Who knows? Um, but it's a big risk to release anything unrated. It worked like a charm for Dawn of the Dead because George, I mean, trust me, they tried to get George to cut a lot of the gore, a lot of the effects and stuff out of Dawn of the Dead. They tried, and there were certain distributors that wanted him to cut it down to 90 minutes, and George refused until eventually found the right partner with Salah Hassan, and they released it unrated, and it was a huge success, all over the world. For that to happen again with something like Day of the Dead, definitely a huge risk. Would it have been more successful? Because we all know the version of Day of the Dead that a lot of people love now was not that big of a hit when it came out. It was a pretty big, I wouldn't say flop, but I mean, it was kind of a bomb when it came out. It really wasn't. It didn't do as well and it being unrated is one of the reasons why I think, especially here in the states, because a lot of theaters wouldn't play it. A lot of newspapers, magazines wouldn't advertise it. Um, s- so it kind of is what it is. But so even if the movie became even bigger and better and more action and more effects and everything, I just think in the mid '80s at that time, I don't know if that would have really mattered in terms of the success of the film. Um, so that's one of those things that, like I said, if Sala had said, "Let's give George the 7 million, make your script, we'll release it unrated." If that thing comes out and it's a huge disappointment at the box office, if it failed at the box office, that could have been something that really could have, I don't wanna say, killed George's career, because nothing would have killed George's career. A lot of filmmakers will have that big bomb, and then they'll never recover from it, and then they just disappear, they're yesterday's news. Romero, I mean, didn't matter. I mean, Romero was not Romero loved making film, and he just was gonna keep finding a way to make it one way or another. We saw that in the '90s. I mean, pretty much Left for Dead in the '90s, and then eventually was just like, "Fuck it, I'm moving to Canada. I'll get, you know, couple million. I'll raise a couple million with Peter Grunwald, and we'll make Bruiser." Um, you know, so I don't know what the effect on George's career would have been if that Day of the Dead script would have been made, released, and if it would have been as much of a disappointment at the box office as. But then at the same time, if the film is bigger, there's more action, because I think a lot of people were going into Day of the Dead, um, thinking, this is, Dawn of the sequel to Dawn of the Dead, so this is going to be awesome. We're going to action, and they were wanting Dawn of the Dead Part Two, and they got something completely different. And so maybe if it was, a bigger, more action packed script with more things going on, word of mouth may have carried a little farther. Who's to say? You never know. Um, check the comments here real quick. I've just been kind of rambling. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to, because that's something that's been on my mind when I put up that poll. I was just like, all of these, there's no wrong answer here. All of these, there's an interesting cause and effect to if all of these would have gotten made or not. Um, Titanic discussions and Mike's awesome. Thank you, thank you. Like I said, hopefully sounds good. Hopefully it's coming in good. Synth says, I got the Day of the Dead script in 1987 and I prefer the theatrical version. I've heard that a lot too. I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I've read that script, a number of times now. And again, you never really know how it would have translated to the screen, what would have gotten lost to translation, what would have come off better on screen than it did on the page. But I'm kind of in the same boat with you, and I think I was talking. I think it was Grande on one of the streams we did. We were talking about that original Day script, and I've always heard, people were like, "Oh, if only that Day of the Dead script would have gotten made, it would have been." As Tom Savini put it, the Ben Hur with zombies. It would have been the Gone with the Wind of zombie films. But I don't know, man. The version we got, I think there was something to that where you just kinda, yeah, it wasn't as big of a success as I think George was kinda hoping for it to be, but at the same time, it's George's favorite of his zombie films. I mean, George loved working on it. He says the greatest experience he ever had working on a film, and that covers a lot. I mean, think about that. Like, you're of all the films that George directed, and I mean, you would think like, oh, directing Dawn of the Dead would have been the most fun, because you're playing in a shopping mall all night for months at a time, and you're doing all this stuff, and you're creating this, you know, uh, extravaganza of a horror film. But Day of the Dead, he always talked about how much he loved working on Day of the Dead and how much fun he had with it, and so yeah, I don't know if that original script would have turned out better than what we got. I know at the time, I know me when I first saw Day of the Dead, I wasn't a huge fan, but over time, like I grew to love it. I was like, oh my god, there's so much here. There's so much to dissect. These characters and the situation that they're in, and I don't know. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of with you on there. I'm in that, or I kind of prefer what we got as opposed to that screenplay. His Resident Evil version would have been much better, I'm sure, since Paul W.S. Anderson is a hack. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's one of those what if situations. Because I mean, of course, I mean, the Resident Evil the movie was a huge success, obviously, because they ended up making like 20 more of those. None of them were worth a shit. But yeah, what else did Paul W.S. Anderson do? I'm trying to remember what else because I know he did the Mortal Kombat adaptation, which is probably why they gave him the fucking job because you know how studio people are. It's kind of like when George was talking about when Warner Brothers put him and Stephen King together originally to do Salem's Lot. They're just like, oh well, he did a movie about a small town with a vampire, and here's a movie about a vampire in a small town. Let's put them together. It's a perfect match. Without thinking anything deeper into it. But you know that these studio execs were just like, oh, we got this Resident Evil property. It's a video game. Who's directed video game movie? Oh yeah, that Super Mario Brothers movie. Yeah, that was a big fucking flop. We don't want that guy. But that Mortal Kombat movie made quite a bit. Who made that? Paul W.S. Anderson. Okay, yeah, get him. We'll let him do it. And that's probably all it was. And like I said, the screenplay that they used wasn't even a screenplay. Wasn't even a Resident Evil screenplay. Wasn't a it was a fucking disaster. Uh, but yeah, Paul W. I mean, he's directed some other stuff too. I can't remember off the top of my head. That was just kind of like, what the fuck. So yeah, let's see. The Resident Evil PlayStation game is great. The music is well done. Yeah, that's one of my favorite. I I remember when I was younger, probably my teen years. It was during that period where we had LimeWire and Napster and Winamx and all those you know those sites or whatever you want to call it, where you could download shit for free. And I went and found like all the entire soundtrack for all of the Resident Evil games from like 1 through 3, I think, like through the Nemesis game. And some of that music is just perfect. Like I've used some of it in like some of my my amateur homemade films or whatever back in the day. Um, it's a great score on those video games. I think that's the thing too. And then of course I think in the movie they used I think Marilyn Manson, which some of that I will say some of the score in the movie is kind of cool. I like the main the main theme or whatever you want to call it for that. That was okay. Um, but for the most part, it's just kind of nondescript, not memorable at all. Um, let's see. Also, the acting in the game is unintentionally hilarious. Yes, the act, especially it's been a while since I've played 3, but I know in part 1, of course, they used like in the first Resident Evil game, the cutscenes were they used real actors, quote unquote, if you want to call them actors, for those cutscenes. And yeah, some of the acting in that was bad, but the voice acting in some of those cutscenes where there was, the actual video game is still ingrained into my mind to this day. Like some of the lines of dialogue, like when Barry comes up to Jill and they're talking, in the hallway, and he's like, uh, here's a lockpick. Maybe you'll get more use out of it than me, you being the master of unlocking. Like, who wrote that line? Like, the master of unlocking. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Um, Another funny thing about that, too, is he hands you something. He's like, here, you can use this. And you take it. Then you look in your bag, and it's like a fucking grenade launcher or something. You're just like, well, that was random. He just handed me a grenade launcher like it was a, pack of Skittles. Um, yeah, that's but you got to remember at the time, like that was kind of the first time that any of that, was being done in a video game. Like now they get real actors and stuff to do that. I mean, the video games now are just as good as watching a movie. But at the time, like that was big time shit. Like I remember seeing my uncle playing Resident Evil for the first time, and I was just like, "Holy shit, he's like playing a movie!" Because I mean, we were used to Nintendo, Sega, Genesis, and stuff like that. Never seen anything like that before. But yeah, unintentionally hilarious, but hilarious nonetheless. Disrupt says the Resident Evil movie was not good or fun. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is there anything positive that I can say about the movie? I know a lot of people talk about the scene where the guy gets the lasers and he gets like split into like 1,000 different pieces. To me, that always looked like shit. It just looked like bad CGI. He looked like he literally looked like he was made of watermelon, like on the inside. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I was never a huge fan of that effect. The liquor, the creature, the liquor in that. It was cool seeing it. Like trust me, first time I saw it on the big screen, it was like holy shit, the liquor is in this movie. It's awesome. But again, bad CGI. That was the thing too. It's like I knew if George had made that Resident Evil film that there wouldn't have been quite as much bad CGI as we ended up getting because George was very anti CGI at the time, which I know he went on to use quite a bit of bad CGI later on with like Diary and Survival and there is some in Land of the Dead as well. But I just think that it's at the time it's budgetary reasons, time. Which is it's a completely different world. Because you think you're like, oh, what do you mean budgetary reasons? You know, Tom Savini was able to do all that awesome shit and Dawn of the Dead for $600,000. They don't have enough money. The Land of the Dead, he had 18 million. They didn't have enough time and money to and head K and B working on it. It is what it is. But yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot that I look back on with that Resident Evil movie, and I'm just like that was well done. That was good. Of course, they had where Mila Jovovich is fighting the dogs and she's doing the Matrixy shit where she's jumping off walls and shit. And I'm just like, this is not in Resident Evil whatsoever. Like, there's no, you're not giving fucking dog sweet chin music in the halls of the mansion in the game or anything. So yeah, it is what it is. Since as Anderson made Event Horizon, yeah, that's another one which is fun but dopey. All the rest of his stuff is pretty bad in general. Yeah, it's been years and years and years since I've seen Event Horizon. I probably, I honestly probably haven't seen that since the '90s when it came out. Um, so I don't remember much about it. But yeah, I do remember him directing that. I really don't remember anything about that movie, to be honest with you. Disrupt says, yeah, but that scene was ripped from Cube. Never seen Cube either. But that's not surprising. I mean, I'm sure I know of the film. I know of Cube, but I've never actually seen it. So it's not surprising to me that they would completely rip that off, put it in a big time studio film or whatever you want to call it. Since his Resident Evil 1 acting was redone in the remake, since the Japanese folks finally caught on to the funny bad acting. Yeah, that's right. And wanted to correct it, sadly. Best acting was in the opening hall scene. What is this? What is that? Another funny line is when they walk back into the opening, like the main hallway that goes up to the stairs, and Wesker's gone, and Barry goes, Wesker! And as a kid, like my mind instantly went to him, like I just thought he was saying whiskers. And so to this day, like I'll say that, like if I see a cat, I'm like whiskers, meow, and I just picture like cat come around the corner or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, just it's great. I know they've ended up redoing like remaking all those Resident Evil games. I know they've done one. I know for a fact they've remade one. I think they remade part two, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I'm kind of out of the video game loop at this point in my life. I think the last Resident Evil game that I remember playing was 5, maybe. I think I remember playing part 5. Part 4 was really good. But yeah, I've just been really out of it. Like I'll play Madden every now and then, or if I find like some of those games, the Telltale games, if you know what I'm talking, where it's just kind of like you're playing through a story and you're making decisions, and your decisions affect what happens with the story going forward. I like those. Those are enjoyable, but so many games now are just so convoluted to me. Like the Call of Duty games and stuff like that. Like I'm just like I used to watch my cousin play that shit for hours, and to me it just looked like he was running around frantically shooting anybody he came in contact with, and I was just like, I don't get it. I just didn't get it. Anyway, but yeah, the other options on this poll though, we talk about The Stand. I think is one that to me, in my opinion, is the best Stephen King Romero fit. Like the best Stephen King adaptation for Romero to do was probably The Stand. I think that would have been the best fit for him. So that's one that I think would have turned out well. Which, well, I think we talked about The Stand a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about George and Steve's relationship. I thought the actual the miniseries that came out of that was pretty successful. And if I'm, it's been like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but but again, that's probably another property that would have ended up going to TV anyway, and I don't think George ever really wanted to direct anything for TV, which is why he stepped away from Salem's Lot. So may not have been in the cards. But I think the really interesting one here to talk about in terms of cause and effect is Pet Cemetery. It's like, what would have happened if George had the ability to, after making Monkey Shines, make Pet Cemetery? Because um, Pet Cemetery was a pretty big hit when it came out. Um, like and it would have been George reuniting with Richard Rubenstein again, continuing their partnership. So that would have been interesting. So let's say George directs Pet Cemetery, it comes out, it's a big success. I think that the trajectory of George's career going into the '90s would have been completely fucking different. We would have seen way more of George in the '90s, I think. And we would have probably. I'll say this. I'll go on a limb and say this. If George ends up doing Pet Cemetery, I think that we would have gotten another Dead film in the '90s. The Dead film that George originally wanted to do. I think Dead Reckoning um, is the one that he wanted to do in the mid '90s, because he wanted to do one every 10 years. That was kind of the thing, one for every decade. Unfortunately, we ended up having to wait 20 years between Day and Land. But I think if he had done Pet Cemetery, and it would have, I think, because it's hard to say, we don't really know. But in my heart of hearts, in my opinion, I think if George had done Pet Cemetery, I think it would have been a better film than what it is. And I like Pet Cemetery a lot. I think it's a really good film and a really good Stephen King adaptation. Mary Lambert did a great job on that. But I think if George had been the one to direct it, I think it would have been an even better film than what we got. I think it would have probably been maybe even a little more successful with a name like George Romero attached to it. And like I said, it would have the trajectory of his career into the '90s would have been completely different. And I think we would have gotten Dead Reckoning in the mid '90s, like '95, '96, something like that. Possibly, who knows? And we all know that horror was kind of in the doldrums in the mid '90s anyway, so maybe not, but who knows? Maybe late '90s. Maybe after Scream had come out and kind of got horror popular again, when we may have gotten more from George during that time. So I think that's an interesting what if too. Is what if George had made Pet Cemetery? Hit the '90s would have been. I think the '90s would have been completely different for George, because of course George would go on to do Two Evil Eyes in 1990, The Dark Half, which he filmed in '91, didn't come out until '93. And that came out, really wasn't that big of a success, and then we didn't see or hear from George for what, 6-7 years after that. He was just kind of stuck in developmental hell. Um, but yeah, just interesting, fun what ifs on that. Um, like I said, Day of the Dead, that original Day of the Dead script, far and away won that poll. But Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil was coming up, close behind. That would have been my pick, but Cinephile Sanity commented on it, said these choices are almost not fair, since I would have loved to have seen them all get done. Excuse me. I started to choke on my Dr. Pepper there for a second. Would have loved to have seen them all get done. I'm going to go with Pet Cemetery, and it came down to that and the original Day of the Dead script for me. It's interesting. Picking Cemetery, since he still made Day of the Dead, and Cemetery had to be passed up since he was already tied down with Monkey Shines, and that is one of his movies that I don't really care for. Okay, but I do have more appreciation for it now, after finally owning it. Yeah, I'm not the biggest Monkey Shines fan either, so I'm definitely with you on that one. Robert Dobbins says all of them I can't choose. Totally agree. Space Cadet says Resident Evil. With you on that one. This guy freaked out. I don't know if this guy had even heard that there was an original Day of the Dead script. He said, "The fuck do y'all mean the original Day of the Dead script? Please, someone comment. I'm dying here waiting for a response." I responded to it, but it sounds like he had no idea that there was even an original Day of the Dead script. But yeah, just fun, just a little something to talk about George a little bit here. Looks like Matt. What's up, man? Good to see you in here, Matt Landrum. Um, was with us, like I said, got a new mic. Hopefully, I'm coming through a little bit better this week. Sound a little bit better. Got Resident Evil 1 Director's Cut for PS1, and it had the demo disc for Resident Evil 2. I remember that. I think I had that one. The Resident Evil 1 Director's Cut, I definitely remember having that one. I don't remember if it came with the demo disc for 2 or not. So I know part 2, I know 2 is the double disc. You can either play as Claire or Leon. I don't remember if it had that demo or not, but played that more than Resident Evil 1. Yeah, I got Resident Evil 2 on release day, and it came with a T-shirt. That's fucking awesome. Wish you still had. Yeah, I wish you still had that too. I bet that's worth money. I know if you, I still have the Resident Evil 2, the case and everything with it, both discs, book and everything still with it, and that thing goes for some pretty good money if you sell that at like a GameStop or something like that. But yeah, I remember playing Resident Evil 2. I remember playing first. That was my first introduction to that series, and I was just fucking blown away. I was just like, "What is going on here? Never seen anything like this before." And then my cousin ended up getting the first Resident Evil, which I think was the director's cut that you're talking about, and we ended up playing it. And in terms of just listen, we're talking like mid late '90s. I was 8, 9, 10 years old. Me and my cousin, we would be playing that shit late at night, just scared shitless. We didn't know what was coming around each corner. I mean, just the way that it's laid out, you got to open a door, it cuts to the door slowly opening, and then all of a sudden, bam, you don't know what the fuck's going to be standing there. I forget the part. I think at the beginning of Resident Evil, I think this is what it was. When you're walking through the hall and the dog jumps through the window for the first time. My cousin Justin, I remember we were sitting up playing one night. It gets to that part. Scared, literally scared the shit out of him. Motherfucker shit his pants. And me and my cousin TJ, we were on the floor dying laughing. He had to run to the bathroom. I mean, it literally scared the shit out of us when we were kids. We had never played. I mean, you gotta think of it. We were used to playing Super Mario Brothers or wrestling games, like WWF WrestleMania the arcade game and stuff like that for Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog. We never played anything like this before. So the music, the atmosphere, just perfect. It's perfect. Now, Justin, if you ever watch this, I apologize for telling tales out of school here, but it's a fun memory. We're talking about Resident Evil, so. Matt says, if you've ever read Pet Sematary, you know that there's a very specific tone that the film missed, even though the film was great. I agree. I think if George had done it, it would have been even darker. I do too. And that's a good point too. If George had taken, which the movie itself, like I said, I'm a fan of the movie. I think of there's some real disturbing shit in that film. A little kid getting killed, coming back and being the main villain is kind of hard to get away with. But even some of the stuff with like the sister and stuff, like really dark, scary shit in that movie. But it does make you wonder if George had gotten a hold of it and done it, what kind of captured that darker essence that the book had. Would it have played as well in theaters? Would people have been like, "Hey, I don't want to know about that"? So who knows? Like I said, this is all nonsense. But that is a very good point. I didn't even think about it that way. George probably would have done it darker. Yeah, very interesting point. Since I said the Battlefield game series, like 1942 and expansions, was my favorite war series and allowed 64 players per room. Holy shit. Great fun and mayhem. drive all the craft and vehicles too. Plays on any standard computer. Yeah, I don't think I've ever Battlefield. That sounds familiar. I may have rented that once. I don't know how old that is. If I haven't, I'm sure my cousin, because my cousin used to play all those games, and when he was living with me, we were roommates for a while. I vaguely feel like I remember watching him play that one of those games. But shit, 64 players per room. God, you get lost. Since his Sega made a game called Flesh Feast, I've never heard of that, which was the closest to a Dawn of the Dead Mall zombie game in the late 90s. Finally tracked it down. It's a bit rough but fun. Dead Rising came out later. Yeah, I've never heard of that. Sega made a game Flesh Feast. Was it on so if it was the late 90s, would have been Sega Dreamcast? Would that what was that where that would have come out at? Because I was not hip to Sega Dreamcast. We were uh, PlayStation. That's kind of where we veered off into. Never really played a lot in 64 either. But yeah, never heard of that. Sounds pretty fucking awesome. I would have loved. That's one. That's one thing that's on my wish list to play one day, which I feel like is possibly more and more possible as we go. If that, I feel like it's possibly more and more possible. I don't know if that's proper English, but I'm a hillbilly from Kentucky. What can I say? A Dawn of the Dead, officially licensed Dawn of the Dead video game, where you can pick between the four characters. Sign me up. Like I don't. I mean, why not? In the day and age of you know online gaming, where you and three other people pick your characters, go throughout the mall. You got missions. You got to go to J.C. Penney's and collect a TV and a radio, or lighter fluid, or chocolate, or whatever the fuck you know what I mean. In this day and age, I mean, where we've gotten a Friday the 13th game where you can play as Jason or whatever. We've gotten a Texas Chainsaw Massacre officially licensed game where with literally the cook, the hitchhiker. I mean, why not? I mean, are you telling me Richard Rubenstein would honestly turn down the opportunity to make a shit ton of money by getting into the video game? One of the biggest industries in the world, the video game industry right now. Why not? I mean, how fun would that be? I mean, Dead Rising, like you mentioned, I remember playing that when it came out, and it was awesome because that was the closest thing we ever had to it. But my dream, like, I mean, literally my dream, like, I've dreamed of this many, many times over my life, is playing a Dawn of the Dead officially licensed video game where you're in the Monroeville Mall. You're, it's got all the stores and stuff, which, I mean, I guess you'd have to, like, reach out and get licensing from all the stores or something. I don't know. I'm sure it wouldn't be easy to pull all that together, and a lot of those stores don't even exist anymore. So I don't really know. There'd be a lot to it, but come on, Rubenstein. I know there's something where you're just like, if we could find the development. I mean, they're out there. I'm sure. Uh, PC game. Oh, so Flesh Feast was a PC game. Here's one that you're talking about. That Fiddler's Green game hack of the Dawn of the Dead Mall would have been awesome, but it was abandoned. Yeah, I remember. I think we talked about this a few weeks back. I think you mentioned this, but yeah, I remember watching that where they literally the entire Monroeville Mall is recreated, and you know, yeah, they should have done something more with that. I feel like I remember hearing because of course you mentioned that Fiddler's Green. Of course, there's the Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green PC game that came out right around the time the movie came out. Not a great game or anything. I don't think it was that successful. I mean, it was it's. But I remember getting it and I remember playing it and having fun with it because what the fuck? I mean, it's a zombie game, based on a George Romero film. I'm all for it. I'm all in. Um, but yeah, it was like a mod that somebody did where they created the Monroeville Mall and created the whole Dawn of the Dead world. That was basically. Uh, I want to say I'm not hip to all this shit or not, but I think you can download a mod for that Land of the Dead game that where you can play inside the Monroeville Mall. I feel like I've seen that somewhere. I remember hearing that somewhere. Um, but even that I would fucking love to do. I don't think I even have I don't even think I have the capabilities to play that game on PC anymore. All I got's my little MacBook Air here. It doesn't even have a a disk drive, like a lot of them don't anymore. Um, but yeah, like that would be pretty damn. I remember playing online with people on that game the first time too. It kind of reminded me. There was a game that I remember playing on PC back in the day called Nam. It was a Vietnam based game, and that game scared the shit out of me because you're literally in the woods and like little, you know, Viet Cong would pop up behind the trees and start shooting out of nowhere, and you're just like, what the fuck? Kind of reminded me of that, like the graphics and gameplay wise, first person shooter type game. But yeah, I would, like I said, I'll pay. I'd pay a shit ton of money to have an officially licensed Dawn of the Dead game. Like I said, you can play it online. I mean, think about how cool would it be? You and three other people, you know, Flyboy, Fran, Peter, Roger, and you have, you know, missions and goals. You know, how I don't know. Doubt we'll ever see it, but but it would be nice to finally to finally achieve that dream of playing an officially licensed Dawn of the Dead game. Viet Cong was the best Nom game. I don't think I ever played that one. The one that I had was I think I got it at like Walmart or something, and it was when I was a kid, and it was just called Nam. I was always fascinated with Vietnam. Like that was always I guess I had uncles that were in Vietnam that would, and we grew up like 15, 20 minutes down the road from Fort Campbell. So we'd go to all the, you know, the air shows and stuff like that. And my uncles would always tell us stories of you know, what it was like in Vietnam. And I mean, that's pretty rough shit. Just, you know, stories to tell, you know, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids. But what, you know, oh wait, it didn't fuck me up anyway. It just made me fascinated with it. I think I just always was always very fascinated with the Vietnam War, which I think is why I became so attracted to, you know, films and stuff from that time period. But I think that's why I was so inspired and so moved by that documentary from IFC, The American Nightmare, because it really ties all those films from that time period into what was going on and over in Vietnam at the time and what was going on in America at the time. I think that's just I think that's kind of what, you know, captured my imagination when I saw that documentary. I was just like, wow. Um, so yeah, when I found a video game called about where you called Nam, where you're playing in Vietnam, I was just like, yeah, yeah, play this. It was a fun game. I remember playing the shit out of it back in the day. But I don't think I ever played. I don't think I ever saw a game called Viet Cong. But anyway, but yeah, I've been going on a little. I didn't expect to be on this long, but I've had a lot of fun just kind of chit chatting and talking shit and interacting with you guys in here on this Sunday afternoon before the Super Bowl. I guess I'm going to give a final Super Bowl prediction. I guess I'm going to. I'll be pulling for the Niners, but I think I'm going to have to. If I'm putting money on it, I'm going to have to put money on the Chiefs. I'd take the Chiefs with the points because I think they're getting 2 points. I mean, it's kind of you know, kind of a push. Yeah, I think I think I'm going to take the Chiefs outright. I think they'll win their third, become the, you know, the modern dynasty, you know, the new Patriots, if you will. I just really don't want to see Taylor Swift and that whole family, the Jackson Mahomes, that little cocksucker. I can't stand him. I don't think anybody can stand. I saw a video the other day where um, Patrick Mahomes' wife, Brittany Mahomes, was just like not letting Jackson in their little VIP area or something. I don't remember what it fucking was, but it doesn't. Yeah, he's just such a shithead. I can't stand it. I can't stand and Brittany Mahomes, and she looks insane. I don't know if like if you guys get a chance to look it up, go look up. So in TNA wrestling a few years back, there was a character named Laurel Van Ness. Brittany Mahomes looks like this Laurel Van Ness character. Which Laurel Van Ness in TNA wrestling was this like blonde haired woman who was stood up at the altar, and now she just, you know, mascara all down her face and a torn, dirty wedding dress, and she's just like snapped. You know, that's who she reminds me of. That's Patrick Mahomes' wife. I just don't want to see this whole fucking family all night long. I don't want to see Taylor Swift all night long. I don't want to see them dancing up in a box. I don't want to see any of that. So I'm pulling for the Niners. Pulling for the Niners. Wouldn't mind seeing the Niners win. Even though they did beat us and put us out of the playoffs, it does help when your team loses and the team that beat you goes on to win a championship. You're like, all right, well, we got beat by the best, so what the hell? But if I'm putting money on it, I'm putting money on the Chiefs. I think they'll pull it out and win number 3 tonight. But we'll see. I'm sure the commercials will be as unbearable as always. Um, I'm hoping not to see. I don't even want to get into it. Because everybody remembers that year where every commercial had to have some message and some, we stand for this or we stand for that and all this other shit. And I was like, I don't give a fuck. Like, dude, do you think I really give a shit where McDonald's stands on the trans issue? No, just make some fucking burgers and move on. Like, anyway, I don't want to get into it. I'm going to get in trouble and kicked off here. But anyway. Sent one last comment here. We used to play Viet Cong on the network at work after hours in 2004. Better than Counter Strike. Counter Strike. That's one I vaguely remember, but no, not Viet Cong. I don't remember playing that one. But anyway, so yeah, taking the Chiefs tonight. If you guys are betting, bet on the Chiefs. If they lose and you guys lose money because of me, I apologize. But what the hell do I know? I'm just some jack off on here talks about George Romero. So, but anyway, like I said, I got some cool streams coming up, some cool ideas. Valentine's Day is coming up this week, so I kind of have an idea for a Valentine's Day Romero mashup type of stream. So I think it'll be pretty interesting conversation there on that one. So we'll do that. And then I got some other stuff in the pipeline. But yeah, I hope this mic sounds okay. Like I said, I'm going to tweak it a little bit, work with it a little bit. Hopefully, test it out, make sure everything's coming through okay, and we'll get it figured out. But appreciate you guys hanging out with me this afternoon. Hope you guys have a great Super Bowl. Hope you guys have a good time. If you're drinking, you're going to be out partying. If you're going to drive home, drive very slowly. Or don't drive at all. That's what I'm trying to say. Don't drive at all. Call a cab or hope I didn't knock that too hard. But anyway, call a cab or Uber or whatever you guys do. But have a good time tonight watching the Super Bowl. Have a good week. I'll see you guys next weekend. And until then, as always, stay scared.